Hi everyone, my name is Natalie. Today I wanted to do my September wrap up. So September, I actually read quite a few books, but most of them were short, and that is because of Shorty September that was going on during the month of September. I will link Storytime, Bert and Sean's channel, as well as Heather's Sucky Expat Book Nerd, who were running Shorty September. Basically the idea was to read short books, to prioritize them during the month, which really helped me in getting to some books that I'd had for a while. But I'll start talking about the books that I don't have physical copies of. So we have Designing the Quietness, a contemporary Finnish design edited by Barbro Kulvik. So this is kind of a niche book in that it is, first of all, it's a bilingual book. Part of it is English, the other part is Japanese. So basically this is an anthology of essays, mostly by Finnish writers, on Finnish architecture and design. And there's a few interviews at the end as well with Finnish architects and designers currently working in the field. Some of the essays really touched on something that I've not been able to put my finger on why I like Finnish design so much. Some of the bits talk mostly about sort of grand scale design such as buildings and things like that. So for example, Alvar Aalto is one of the names that comes up in several of the essays, and one of the main reasons that I've become drawn into this topic in the first place and why I was looking for this book, or looking for Finnish design related books through my library, and this came up in my library's database. But also design in sort of interior design and patterns and prints and that kind of thing, which of course is also something that a lot of people know about Finland with Marimekko and those kinds of things. So it was just a really interesting anthology of essays and interviews, and I don't know how easily it would be to access it, but if you're at all interested in the topic, it's well worth looking to see if you can get hold of it. I will read you just a little bit of a paragraph of one of the essays that I think captures some of the ideas that it explores. Silence is a deeply underlying feature in Finnish architecture and design. It shuns the loud, the fast-moving, the frantically conspicuous. Our world of objects has a placid presence. It is intellectually inspiring, radiating cool beauty. We tune our environment between abstract modernism and organic natural forms. Nature has a strong presence in our tradition, not as decoration, but as a library of forms and a map of colors. The other book that I borrowed from my library in September and read is Namn by Elin Willows. So Elin Willows is a Swedish contemporary writer. I read her first book, Inlands, in April this year, and really loved it. So this book just came out. It hasn't been translated into English yet, but I suspect it will be, given that the first book was. This one is similarly to Inlands. One of the things that Elin Willows is really good at is exploring the texture of the everyday. The protagonist of this book creates very, very close, intimate relationships with a few women throughout her life. And so we basically follow her from her teenage years as she makes her first really intimate friend. And we see her later in life creating new such bonds. And these bonds, as I said, I call them friendships, but they're more like straddling the line between romantic and platonic. And that was one of the things that I really loved about this book, the sense of intimacy that can come up very quickly, especially in the earlier relationships, the teenage friendship or relationship, that is just, they connect very quickly and become inseparable and share every free moment together. And it's just an entirely encapsulating kind of relationship. And there's something unsaid about the boundaries between what they are to each other and where to draw the line for how much they can expect of each other and things like that. But just as quickly as this friendship or relationship blooms, it also melts into nothing. And it's sort of something that haunts the protagonist throughout her life. And I think it also lurks in the background when she creates new relationships. Even though there could be drama in the book, the way it's written is very quiet, and that is something I really love about Elin Willows. It was a fantastic book. I hope that it will get an English translation in the near future. I will update you if I hear anything about it. Then the rest of the ones I have are physical books from my physical TBR, which is great. So this one is actually not from my physical TBR. It is, I borrowed this from my sister. And this is White Blight, or Vitsvit, by Athena Farrokhzad. So this is an Iranian Swedish writer. This is a Swedish poetry collection exploring family, love, religion, racism, other forms of discrimination, identity, immigration. All of the poems have a similar structure in that there's family members to the narrator, or the voice guiding you through the book. There's a mother, a father, an uncle, and an aunt, a grandmother, and a brother, I think, to the narrator, or the protagonist of the poetry collection of the book. And the poem starts with "my mother said" or "my brother said." With all of these voices, they each have different worldviews, different stories to tell, different interpretations of situations, and the collection itself feels like a way for the narrator to navigate all of these often conflicting stories or conflicting perspectives. Some of the other voices are quite pushy in trying to take over or to influence the narrator in how they should be thinking. I will read you one poem that has been translated into English to give you a sample of the style. "My father said your brother shaved before his beard started to grow. Your brother saw the terrorist's face in the mirror and wanted a flat iron for Christmas. My brother said someday I want to die in a country where people can pronounce my name." Next we have Snotgirl Volume 2, California Screaming, and this is by Bryan Lee O'Malley and illustrated by Leslie Hung. I love Leslie Hung's style of illustration. That is the main reason I picked the first volume up. I did not enjoy this volume as much as the first one. I felt like some of the humor were a little bit too much on the nose. And so basically this series follows a fashion blogger. In the first volume, we see her getting entangled with another fashion blogger in a mystery related to deaths, and it's kind of unclear how it ends in the first volume, and it was very suspenseful. This volume continues with Snotgirl's complicated relationship with this woman called... So Snotgirl is called Lottie. Caroline is the other fashion blogger that she has this complicated kind of romantic relationship with in the first volume. But this one, basically the core story is that Lottie is going to an event or like a convention with some other influencers, I suppose, and something happens there. A new mystery comes up. She becomes entangled in that, of course. So it's much like the first volume. It is suspenseful. It is tongue-in-cheek that I enjoyed with the first volume. A lot of the humor is related to sort of social media culture. The art is very much my kind of thing. And it's still fun to read. The convention atmosphere was fun, and the mystery is still fun to follow. But as I said, I feel like the story was less tight than the first volume, and particularly the humor or the jokes related to social media culture and all of the sort of modern related commentary in the book was a bit too much. Next up we have the book I read for Invisible Cities in September, and that is Seeing Red by Lina Meruane, translated by McDowell. So this is basically about a woman who is at a party when the book opens, and she has a bleeding in her eye, which makes her, or which results in her becoming blind or almost blind, and she starts to she goes to the hospital and trying to investigate what is happening. It is very uncomfortable to read, both in the sense of the medical and the physical experience that she's having with the sense of chaos and of loss of control, and of knowing that something's wrong but they are not really able to understand what is happening. So there's a lot of really interesting things about this book. One of the things is that she has sort of, even though she is losing her sight, she kind of has an internal sight. So for example, she's able to guide her boyfriend when he's driving down the streets that she's very familiar with, and so she is able to have this sort of internal eye. So that is something that feels very like a very aware choice by Meruane. There's also a lot of commentary related to agency in regard to the health situation and how other people want to direct her to make certain choices or want to take over the reins of her life, particularly her mother. And there's sort of a mixed feeling of her mother wanting to control her life, but also not wanting to have that responsibility. So there's a lot of things related to that I feel like a lot of things to unpack in this book. And it's just a really psychologically tense book. So one of the things that I feel with my reading experience of this book is that I read it over a longer period of time because I found it quite uncomfortable to read. And I don't think that is necessarily the best way to read this. It feels kind of like with Samantha Schweblin's Fever Dream. It feels like the kind of book that you kind of need to dive into and be stuck in that situation for a while and not really go out of it until you're finished. I think this is the kind of book that I would like to reread in the future, and definitely I want to read Meruane's other book, Nervous System, that also I think tackles medical things, the physical body and that kind of thing. And I think that is also something that she explores, definitely particularly connected to a woman's perspective. Or a woman's experience. Next is another uncomfortable book at times, and that is Katalin Street by Magda Szabo, translated by Len Ricks. So I buddy read this with Sarah from Hardcover Hearts. Basically follows 3 households in Hungary, grow up, the families of the households grow up together, particularly the children of the families are very close. So we have Blight, who is the son of a soldier. We have Henriette, who has just moved to the neighborhood, who is of a Jewish family. And we have Blanca and Irene. Both of them are their dad, I think, is a professor, and so they're quite well-to-do. This neighborhood, this street where they live, is Katalin Street. Henriette, as I said, she is of a Jewish family. Her parents are taken away because of the war, and she herself is killed. And this is something that happens very quickly in the book. You already know, I think, even from the prologue of the book, that she will die. So she is killed, and the repercussions of that is what this book is sort of centrally about. How Irene, Blanca, their family, and Blight react to this. It is a very bleak book in the sense that the Second World War and its effect on people is like a shadow running through the book. And death is obviously a very central part to all of these characters' lives. Even though Henriette's death hits them very hard, it feels to me like it's more of a symbolic and concrete effect of the war that makes it so hard for them to deal with it. It isn't just that it is this young girl who has died too early, but that something so atrocious can happen, and they have a very hard time dealing with this. So the very beginning of the book, we see them further in the future, the adult versions of all of these characters and how how they've lived up to that point and how they're still looking back on Katalin Street. The main reason really that I didn't like this one as much as both Abigail and the Door is the resolution of some of the relationships in the end. And sort of the direction of their lives. The resolution felt not just bleak and sad, but also I was a bit disappointed with how certain things turned out, particularly for the female characters in the book. I loved reading this together with Sarah for all of the discussion, and I do love Szabo as a writer, and I think there's still enough of her excellence in this book to make it worthwhile to read. But I feel like it is not as well balanced as the other two books I've read from her are. Next up we have The Lady and the Little Fox Fur by Violette Leduc, translated by Coltman. So this might be my favorite book of the month. It's a short but very effective novella. So this book is about an elderly woman living in a Paris apartment. She is very poor, so she can barely afford food, and the food that she has managed to get hold of, she's trying to make it last as long as humanly possible. But the more interesting part for me was the hunger for human connection. So she is walking around the city and looking for a way to connect with other human beings, because she doesn't have friends or family. She doesn't have any social network or social context, and because of that she sort of inserts herself into other people's social gatherings. So for example, she goes to the harbor, I think, to watch the men working there, just to feel like she's part of something. And so it's about her sort of observing people and trying to find some way of becoming part of other human lives. And one of the things that happens in this book is that she finds a little fox fur that's been thrown out, and she kind of adopts it as if it's a living thing. And the way she sort of plays with the idea of selling it just to create an imaginary meeting with other human beings and having a reason to interact with other people. But then she decides against it. So it's just this sort of, she creates this entire imaginary thing and then decides not to, but it just takes up her time and her mind. And just the way this book explores the hunger and the poverty and the invisibility of her in the city is so visceral, so well crafted. I highly recommend this book. This is a fantastic little translated gem. I'm looking forward to reading more by Violette Leduc in the future. The last three we have are all non-fiction books. We have The Red Planet, A Natural History of Mars by Simon Morden. I got this from the publisher Elliot and Thompson, and it was published in the beginning of September. This is a natural history of Mars, so it is basically a chronological origin story of the planet, and it talks about Mars from geology and astrophysics. So it is literally a natural history, and I think that is something that I haven't really seen done in space nonfiction that I've read. Most of them seem to talk about human exploration and human knowledge. Simon Morden himself is almost completely absent, and humans are mostly absent. It's more about the planet itself and what we know and what we think we know. And a lot of the time he makes this point in the prologue or the introduction that a lot of our knowledge of Mars is very unstable. It's more theories than it is official fact, and sometimes we have theories that are conflicting as well. So he sort of presents you with a few of the theories that are reasonable explanations of things that could be, and he lets you sort of evaluate how you feel about all of the different bits of information. So some of it is closer to speculation than fact. Definitely well worth your time if you're interested in Mars. Lastly, I finally finished 2 books that I had started a while ago. So we have Disney's Land, Walt Disney and the Invention of the Amusement Park That Changed the World by Richard Snow. I found this really interesting because I hadn't actually read any books specifically about Disney World or Disneyland. A lot of new information for me. I particularly enjoyed the designing aspect of this book and the reception of the park. So the designing aspect was interesting for me because it was very, of course, a lot of things that goes into a designing of a particular space I find interesting. What various physical things you can manage to create particular behavioral patterns, and the reception, as I said, when the park actually opened, and what a disastrous day the first day was, and a lot of the things that went wrong with the first few days and how they were trying to deal with it. The part of this that I found less interesting were the financial aspects and sort of the business side of things, which was a big part of the book. And I mean, it makes sense because it's really a history of the park. If you're interested in the park, if you have personal experience, you might see different things because I've never been to any of the parks. You might be familiar with certain things. But for me, it was all new ground because I hadn't really touched on anything beyond sort of anecdotes related to this part of his career. And then lastly, we have this book, Sätta, världen, rörelse by Anna-Karin Palm. This is a Swedish biography about Selma Lagerlöf. So as you can tell, it's a chunker, and I have read this since March, I want to say. It was really great. I think one of the things that makes this a fantastic biography is that it uses so much primary resources, particularly a lot of letters that Selma Lagerlöf wrote. She sort of went against the grain and did a lot of things that weren't expected of women and did things in her own way, and for that reason she's really important for women's history in Sweden and for literature history here. So in that sense, it was interesting to read about her and to see all of the things that she managed to do. The thing that I found most interesting about this book was seeing, on the one hand, her relationships with other women. So there's 2 women in particular that she seems to have had romantic relationships with. It's very... at least the letters are very suggestive of this, but also Selma was a really confident writer. She sort of went against the establishment of the time. So really, really interesting historical figure, and I think for the most part I enjoyed Anna-Karin Palm's own commentary on Selma Lagerlöf and how she fits into her historical context. With a few exceptions, I think there's a few moments when I feel like her commentary isn't, or her arguments isn't necessarily convincing to me. But overall, I felt like this was a good and well-balanced biography, and particularly the primary resources made this a really intimate kind of biography. I felt like I got a really good sense of Selma's personality and how she changed over time as well. So there's that. Those are the books that I read in September. I would love to know what you read in September, if you've read any of these books. If you have been reading anything really good in October, let's chat in the comments. I hope you're doing well and you're taking care of yourselves, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.